Hi, welcome to the Also Called podcast, where we're asking hard questions about our place in this hectic world.
Join us as we dig into the truth about who God is, possibly discovering that we are also called. Welcome to the Also Called podcast. And in today's episode, we have Dr. Trudy Johnson here with us again. And we're going to be talking about Photini, also known as the woman at the well. We're going to look at her story and we're going to look at what she might have been experiencing as she was at that well, as she met that man who knew everything about her. So welcome, get ready, and here we go.
Okay, listeners, just as a recap, Photini, or the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well, was just out running her errands, doing her thing, and she ran into this guy who happened to be Jesus. And in that conversation, we see she had a little bit of sass when she first started talking to him. It was kind of like a, why are you talking to me kind of thing. So throughout that interaction, Jesus revealed himself to her as the Messiah, and it changed her life. She left her bucket at the well, ran into town to let everybody know who Jesus was and what he told her about her. Other people they come to know Jesus because of the interaction that he had with her at the well. But we see throughout the interaction, she seemed very defensive, as though she entered into the conversation with some assumptions about who he was and maybe what his intentions were. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today with Dr. Trudy about the narratives that we have in our head, the scripts that we tell ourselves. So, Dr. Trudy, thank you for joining us again. For our first time listeners, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Andrea, yes. Thanks for having me here. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Been doing that almost 20 years. Started out in marriage counseling and therapies, but I have switched basically to a lot of trauma work because I started discovering in marriages how traumatized people were. They literally, couples have PTSD of each other practically because that's bouncing on a lot of woundedness from their past. I'm really focusing now more on the trauma aspect and really enjoying my work now and part-time-ish also so that I can spend some time with my husband and my grandchildren, just enjoying life and doing what God says when it's time to do it.
Thank you so much. And what drew you to being a part of the Other Disciples project?
Yes, Andrea, well, there were two things. First of all, I love the subject, and I love that women need to understand how involved Jesus was with women, when he actually chose women and besides men. And so I just love the topic and love the discussion of it all. And then secondly, knowing that Mia was involved in this project, I had no worries that it wouldn't be an awesome project. She's a very diligent, hard worker. I trust her. So part of it was just because Mia came to me and suggested this topic. And I just thought, yes, if Mia's going to do it, yay, I'm jumping on board.
You're so amazing. Thank you. That means a lot. We so appreciate you being with us this week. What drew you to wanting to write about Photini?
Photini is kind of my typical client. She's what I call the woman of trauma. That means whenever there's several layers of trauma going on in a person's life, there could from all different directions, a lot of trauma. So and a lot of hiding probably and pretending like nothing's wrong with my life, except that it's completely crashing, right? So I just am intrigued by the woman of trauma that Photini was. And then also, I love the aspect that you came from as far as narratives. That's so important.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I identified as Photini with the assumptions. What did you enjoy most about writing Photini?
I liked thinking about the false narrative that she was living in and how that false narrative impacts all of us and how we have to try to make our life work, even though it actually isn't working. I just love that the angle that you guys took on this story.
So let's dive into the actual psychology of Fatini's issue. What are narratives?
Narratives are stories basically that we tell ourselves, and we kind of have to make up our story to match our life so that we can survive it. Narratives are stories basically born out of trauma and not looking at our life truthfully. So usually I would say people living in narratives, they aren't living their true self or their true life as God would want us. Typically it is because of a lot of woundedness from their past, and they're needing to make life work for them. So they have to come up with a story.
So it sounds like another one of those beautiful things. The way God created us, our brain wants to keep us safe, and
Mhm.
it recognizes patterns as a way to do that, to be able to keep us safe. When something looks familiar, our brain automatically makes an assumption kind of to help us stay safe in whatever environment it is. So is that kind of how we develop those narratives?
Correct. Yes. There, you typically any of these jarring moments that cause us, normally it's going to be in childhood. They can be small little moments, 15 to 25 seconds, where it's just like a hiccup moment of I'm not okay, I'm not safe. And then God, I believe in his mercy, lets children see something besides the truth in that situation so they can survive it. So it's kind of a natural coping mechanism that God gives children so that things don't feel so hurtful, so they don't feel so alone. It's a beautiful, wonderful gift that God gives children. The challenge is he doesn't want us living out of those when we're adults.
Dr. Trudy, that is amazing to me that it takes so little time, just a few seconds, to be impactful. And I recently had a thought about an early childhood memory I had. I have an older brother, he's 7 years older than I am, and he was a pyromaniac. And to this day, I still don't know exactly what was happening. But I remember as a child, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. I had done something and I had gotten in trouble. And later that day, my mother found some papers burned underneath my bed. And
Mm.
of course, I got in trouble for that because my parents thought that I was setting things on fire and putting it under my bed. And I was like, no, I didn't do that. And the next day it happened again. And in my little brain, I thought, oh my gosh, what I did was so bad that even the devil is trying to get me in trouble because I connected fire and something underneath with Satan, and I related that to I had done something that was so bad. And so it's amazing the way our brain thinks. So, and it created a narrative for me.
Wow.
So, that being said, the narratives that we create to protect ourselves, they're not always reliable, are they?
Oh my goodness, they're usually not reliable. As you can see, that was a child agreeing, basically needing to agree of how terrible they were. You need to actually self-loathe in order to live through that. And it's fascinating how destructive these narratives can be in just a small, innocent little time, a very, very short amount of time. It can be a sentence zinged out. I had a client once who the father said, if you don't quit eating like a pig, no guy's ever going to love you. Went into a full-blown eating disorder for several years of her life. So how one sentence can just zing you, and then you create the narrative. If I eat, no one's going to love me ever. And like you, yes, you had to be flawed in order to survive that. That's so sad. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Isn't it amazing that our brain, again, we keep saying this over and over and over, it's our brain is there to protect us and help us survive. But isn't it amazing that our brain tries to fill in the gaps when we don't understand? And now that we're older and we're looking at back at these stories we've either told ourselves or thought all these years they were wrong. And it's so beautiful when I believe it was Allison had said, in God's timing, we're healed. And so when we're now hitting these ages where he's like, well, let me correct those narratives that you had wrong or you didn't understand or you tried to fill in a gap that you just, you couldn't as a child. So when we have these thoughts and we develop these false ones, is there anything that we can do? Is there hope to get rid of them or correct them?
Of course, we always have hope because we're constantly being transformed into the image of Christ, right? We're new creations in Christ. And to understand, God doesn't, Andrea, you say you're 5 when that happens. So basically, there are times in your adult life when a 5-year-old was calling the shots. So we don't want that childlike narrative based on fear and in order to survive rule our adult life. I look at the false narrative, I call them false refuges. And so there are pieces to these false refuges that we create as children. And typically we can just kind of take a moment, like you say, we just pray and ask the Lord, show me where this is coming from. What were my coping mechanisms? What did I pick up? What behaviors did I pick up? What did I do with my heart? Did I hide my heart? Did I put a wall around my heart whenever I'm unsafe? And even just show me, what do I do with my thought processes when I'm unsafe? Do I go into terrible anxiety or do I try to be perfect? So we could kind of, with God's help, walk through these false narratives to identify and pull them apart, bring them to the light. And that's how we heal. Anything hidden and not brought to the light is going to keep on driving our behaviors and our thoughts. So bringing it to the light, asking God, whoa, how is this impacting my life today is really key. And thank you that we have a Savior who wants us to be new creations. He doesn't want children running our adult life.
Yeah, that's what again, this past year has been definitely a healing journey emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And I always thought, and I am a massage therapist, so I am pretty open to some kind of woo-woo things. But when people talk about healing their inner child, I just thought like, okay, that's a little silly. But as I learned more about that, it's like you were saying that memory that I have, I was around 5 or 6 years old, and it makes sense that when something happens, you revert back to that age. And so having to work through that and challenge those narratives by asking for evidence, like when something happens, and I have another bias, which is what we talked about in the chapter with Photini. Another way that I relate to her and an assumption that we have is religious men. I have this assumption, and so did she. Well, she didn't necessarily know that he was a religious man, but she sees this guy at the well, and based on the time of day that she went, it seems like she was probably trying to avoid interacting with people. And so there's this guy here, and the assumption is this is going to be a problem, or he's going to make certain assumptions about me because I don't fit the expectation of what society says that I'm going to look like. And so she entered into that interaction with those walls up that you mentioned. And I have a tendency to do the same thing. And so I'm learning to, when I'm meeting new people, not automatically say, I've never had an interaction with this guy. I don't know if he's going to dismiss me just because I'm a female, or if he's going to hear what I have to say. So as we were talking about in a previous episode, giving ourselves that space the time to check in with our body and that emotion and process through that and challenge it. I think all of those you've given us over the last few times that you visited with us, you've given us lots of great tools to be able to apply in all of these different things.
A little addition, just FYI, a little bit more information. Whenever we create these narratives, so Andrea, like for instance, 5 or 6, there's no timestamp to them. And so they stay embedded in our neural network system at that age. And so whenever roll the tape down the road, you kind of feel the same way, you fall in the same ditch. You almost can feel like you're 5 again. You feel childlike, powerless, and you have no defenses. And so it's just fascinating that most narratives have no timestamp to them. Whenever they get created, they stay that age. It's all very amazing.
Wow, it's how complex are our brains and our bodies, and then connected to our spirits. So that's super interesting. So, what is the brain science behind memory and narratives?
Just as I was saying, there's a neural network system that will help us survive. And so again, it's only usually a 15 to 25-second moment at a time. And that all that information gets embedded. It's like pressed in, kind of like the computer, right? It's getting programmed. We can think of it that way. You're getting programmed with certain information so that in the future, when I run into a similar situation, I'll know how to act. So that's that. Basically, again, I think if we could just encapsulate the thought that I don't want a child running my adult life anymore. I can do this differently. And with God's help, I can operate out of truth, not out of really a false view of life.
That's so good. So, how do you think Jesus helped Bettini to retrain those false narratives and hurtful narratives that she had about herself and who he was?
The cool thing about it is because we think, oh, to be truthful, that's going to be really hurtful. He started with truth and he ended with truth. So he spoke the truth, and that kind of got her attention. Who is this guy that actually knows my true narrative? And then he elevated her with the hope of, you don't have to live like this anymore. And that's a truthful statement. So just thinking of God desires truth in the inward parts. So that's how he dealt with her. He brought truth into that false narrative, and that broke it completely apart.
So, what do you want our listeners to take away today? What's a practical application of if we're starting to hit that stage of life where we're recognizing maybe some of the narratives in our head aren't true and we don't want the child in the seat anymore running our lives. So, what are some practical things that we can do?
Awareness is what's going to accelerate the healing process. So if we can almost feel our hearts putting up a wall, that could be a sign I'm not safe. I'm having to self-protect. Let me take a few moments. What's going on here? Why did I just do that? Why did I react that way? So maybe in the moment you're not able to do that, but you can pull away and pray and say, God, what was that reminding me of? He's so good about showing us the truth. He loves that we live in truth. That's again, he loves truth. He is truth. So just to be aware, again, our bodies are going to tell us there's going to be like a knee-jerk reaction, a overreaction, and be aware of that and create space and pull apart some time to explore and be curious about, why did I react like that? That wasn't even needed. And so awareness really is going to be the beginning place of all of that.
I think the other piece of it is not judging ourselves. That
Yeah.
was one of the most freeing things that I went through a year and a half ago was forgiving the 17-year-old Mia or the 7-year-old Mia, or, whenever the narrative would come up, forgiving that little girl for not having the skills to handle these situations better but at the same time, submitting them to Christ and saying, what's a better way to do this or a better way to see this? So I love that. Thank you for that.
Yes, oh my goodness, aren't we all? Don't we have to survive? There are days where the only thing we can do is create a narrative. So we can heal, we can a lot of healing from all of our narratives, but we're so creative and survival mode. We'll create another narrative. We'll get rid of one and we'll have another one. And so just to, as you say, man, not to have a lot of grace even for ourselves. We give everyone else more grace than we do ourselves, but realize, wow, when I was 5 or 6, look what I had to do to survive that was terrible that someone is lighting a fire under your bed. So just to give ourselves a lot of grace in looking at where all of this came from and not to be so hard on ourselves and let us realize. And I think maybe our goal can be this year, I'm going to try not to create any more narratives, but if I do, it's okay. I'll figure it out and I'll keep on going. So just kind of to make it our goal every year to create less narrative and to live in truth. And I guess I'll finish up. I love, love, love the way the message says, Psalm 51:6, what you're after is truth from the inside out. Enter me then, conceive a new true life. Isn't that great if we could all live in that and make that our goal?
That is so beautiful. That's why we encourage our listeners to continue to be curious and keep seeking God's truth, because that is the only thing that we can truly hang on to. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Trudy, for joining us today, helping us challenge the narratives that we have. And listeners, thank you so much for coming back to learn about Photini, and join us next week. I believe we are going to be looking at Elizabeth. So until then, be curious
and keep seeking.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Also Called provides a space for honest conversations about the truth of who God is, who we are, and the relationships He wants us to have with Him, each other, the church, and ourselves. This episode was just the start of the conversation. Be sure to check the show notes for extra resources to go further. You can also find our social media sites to join the discussion. Don't miss our next chat by subscribing to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also Called is part of Bible and Pop Culture, a crowd-funded nonprofit that allows us to provide our content to start great conversations for free. You can help us keep doing this by checking out BibleandPopCulture.com or AlsoCalled.org's donate subscribe buttons with a one-time gift, supporting us monthly, or sharing us with someone who might like the conversation. Thank you for being a part, and see you next conversation.